The moment Commander Zyra saw the star map shift, her heart froze. The ship's navigation had been set on an irreversible course, straight to the one place every species in the galaxy feared. Earth. A low hum filled the bridge as the Nithran warship, the Vindicator, cruised through the void. Every officer around her worked silently, their eyes flicking to the glowing red destination marker on the screen. No one dared to say it out loud. Zyra clenched her jaw. This had to be a mistake. No sane being would enter Earth's sector. Even the strongest empires, the Drathians, the Zentar Dominion, even the unstoppable Varric fleets, had all failed to conquer that planet. She turned sharply. Navigator. Confirm our course. The helmsman, a young officer with trembling hands, swallowed hard. Commander, the path is locked in. High Command has ordered it personally. There is no turning back. Zyra's blood turned to ice. What? She stormed toward the communication console. Patch me through to Fleet Command. Now. The officer hesitated but obeyed. A flickering hologram of Admiral Vortha, a battle-hardened Nithran with scars running down his face, appeared before her. His expression was unreadable. Commander Zyra, he said, his voice deep and unwavering. You are to lead the first wave. The High Council has decided. It is time for Earth to fall. Zyra couldn't hide her shock. Sir, with all due respect, we have all heard the stories. No one has ever conquered that world. Every army that tried has disappeared. Why risk it now? The Admiral's gaze darkened. Because we have no choice. A silence settled over the bridge. The crew exchanged nervous glances. Zyra gritted her teeth. Explain. Vortha sighed. Our empire is dying, Commander. The Varric are pushing into our borders. Our fleets are stretched thin. We need Earth's resources, their technology, whatever makes them so damn powerful. Zyra remained silent, her mind racing. The humans. There was something about them. Something unnatural. They were not the most advanced species. They were not the strongest. Their ships were outdated. Their weapons were crude. And yet, they had never lost a war. No matter how large the invasion force, Earth had always survived. Zyra took a slow breath. How many ships in the fleet? 50. Her pulse quickened. 50 warships. That was enough to burn an entire solar system to ash. But would it be enough against them? Vortha leaned closer. Commander, failure is not an option. You are to land on Earth, assess their weaknesses, and prepare the first strike. The humans must be crushed before they have a chance to retaliate. Zyra hesitated. Everything in her instincts screamed turn back. But orders were orders. She saluted. Understood, Admiral. Vortha's hologram flickered out. Silence filled the bridge. A young lieutenant stepped forward hesitantly. Commander, do you think we can actually win? Zyra exhaled slowly, looking at the red-marked planet on the screen. She had no answer. But deep in her gut, a terrible feeling settled inside her. They were flying straight into a graveyard. And they might never return. Zyra stood on the observation deck, staring at the planet growing larger in the viewport. The pale blue world rotated silently against the void, its surface marred with storms and sprawling landmasses. It looked so peaceful. But she knew better. The galaxy whispered legends about Earth. It was a graveyard for conquerors, a place where entire armadas vanished without a trace. No one knew why. Some claimed the humans had technology beyond comprehension. Others believed they were something more than mortal. But the truth was lost in the ruins of fleets that had dared to challenge them. Her claws tapped rhythmically against the metal railing. This was madness. A soft chime broke her thoughts. The ship's AI flickered to life beside her, its hollow, synthetic voice filling the quiet room. "Commander, we are entering Earth's orbit. Stealth systems engaged." Zyra inhaled sharply. It was time. Behind her, the War Council gathered, strategists, weapons specialists, invasion tacticians. They were all battle-hardened warriors, yet none could hide their unease. "Report," she ordered, turning to her chief intelligence officer. Lieutenant Vara, a wiry Nithran with sharp yellow eyes, hesitated before responding. "We have intercepted human transmissions. There is no sign they know we're here." Zyra narrowed her eyes. "No planetary defenses activated?" Vara shook her head. "None. Their cities remain operational, energy signatures normal. It's as if they aren't even looking for threats." A deep silence settled over the room. It didn't make sense. Every world in the galaxy had orbital defenses, ion cannons, planetary shields, something. But Earth? Wide open. Vara cleared her throat. "Commander, something else. The transmissions we intercepted," she hesitated. Zyra frowned. "What about them?" Vara exhaled. "They're strange. Unlike anything we've encountered." She tapped a control pad, and the room filled with sound. The humans' voices echoed around them. But it wasn't battle chatter. It wasn't even military coordination. It was laughter. Zyra felt her skin prickle. The humans were laughing. Talking. Singing. As if they had no idea that a fleet of warships had just entered their orbit. As if they weren't afraid at all. A thick tension filled the room. No one spoke. Zyra clenched her jaw. They're either completely unaware or... She didn't finish the sentence. Or they simply didn't care. She turned sharply. "Deploy the recon squads. I want boots on the ground within the hour." The descent. The drop pods slammed into the ground with bone-rattling force. Zyra's armor absorbed most of the impact, but she still felt the unnatural weight of Earth's gravity pressing down on her as she stepped forward. Trees. Strange air. The scent of salt and life and something else she couldn't place. It was nothing like the metal worlds of the Empire. The squad fanned out, weapons drawn. They were in what the humans called a city, but it was unlike any settlement she had ever seen. No towering fortresses. No defensive turrets. Just buildings. Tall, glass-covered structures, blinking lights, narrow roads filled with human vehicles. And people. The humans walked freely, unaware of the soldiers watching from the shadows. Some were talking, others eating, their faces glowing in the light of their strange devices. It was bizarre. Her second-in-command, Captain Relka, adjusted his visor. "I don't like this, Commander. No security, no resistance, this is a trap." Zyra felt the same. "Stay alert. We observe first. No engagement unless necessary." But then. A sound. A distant roar, deep and guttural. Zyra froze. The entire squad stiffened. The sound didn't come from the humans. It came from above. Slowly, she looked up. And her blood ran cold. Above the city skyline, something moved. Massive, metallic, unnatural. The air shimmered around it, bending light like a mirage. A warship? No. Something worse. Zyra gripped her weapon tighter. The humans were still oblivious. How? Couldn't they see it? Then, it vanished. A flicker, a distortion, and then, nothing. Captain Relka exhaled sharply. What was that? Zyra didn't answer. She couldn't. Because suddenly, she wasn't sure if the humans were the real threat here. Or if something else was watching them. Zyra's breath came slow and controlled, but inside, her heart pounded like war drums. Her squad had trained for planetary invasions, urban warfare, and even survival in hostile environments, but nothing in the Empire's military doctrine prepared them for this. Earth was silent. Not in the natural way of an untouched world, nor in the eerie quiet of an abandoned ruin. It was a deliberate silence, like a predator holding its breath. And yet, the humans walked freely. They laughed, spoke, moved without fear. Did they not know what was out there? Or had they simply learned to live with it? Zyra tightened her grip on her rifle. Relka, confirm what we saw. Her second-in-command adjusted his visor, scanning the skyline. Nothing on sensors. No readings, no energy signatures. But I swear it was there. It was there. She knew it. They had all seen it, a massive form, bending light, shifting like a shadow in the sky. But when she looked again, it was gone. It didn't vanish. It simply chose not to be seen. Zyra turned to her squad. We're moving out. Regroup at the rendezvous point. Now. The team fell into formation, silent as wraiths. They advanced through the city, careful to avoid detection. And yet, the feeling remained, something was watching them. The air felt heavier. Then came the first scream. Not a human scream. Something else. Zyra whipped around, weapon raised. A few streets away, deep in the shadows of a narrow alley, something moved. Something fast. A shape lunged forward, grabbing one of her scouts, Private Ezo, before he could react. His strangled cry barely lasted a second before he was yanked into the darkness. Zyra sprinted toward him. Ezo. But the alley was empty. No blood. No body. No trace. As if he had never been there at all. A pulse of fear rippled through the squad. Captain Relka gritted his teeth. Commander, this is no ordinary planet. Zyra exhaled sharply. We need to leave. A clicking sound echoed in the distance. A low, guttural rhythm, like bones tapping against metal. It came from everywhere and nowhere at once. Then, a voice. Not human. Not alien. Something else. It spoke in perfect, unbroken Nithran. You should not have come. The squad froze. The voice wasn't a warning. It wasn't a threat. It was a statement of fact. And it was the last thing they heard before the lights in the city blinked out. The vanishing. The darkness swallowed them whole. Zyra activated her visor's night vision, but it flickered violently before going black. The technology was useless. Whatever was out there, it had the ability to disrupt their systems. Panic surged through the squad. Stay together. No one separates. Zyra barked, forcing steel into her voice. But the shadows had other plans. A second scream, this time, from behind them. Another soldier was gone. No gunfire, no struggle. Just, gone. Zyra spun, aiming wildly into the blackness. Show yourself. Silence. Then, a whisper. It came from right behind her. This is our world. Zyra turned, but nothing was there. Her instinct screamed at her to run. But where? The city had become a maze of empty streets, stretching in impossible directions. Buildings they had passed seconds ago had shifted. It was as if the entire planet was alive. Captain Relka's voice cut through the chaos. Commander. The humans, look. Zyra turned toward the main street, and her blood ran cold. The humans were still there. Unbothered. Unafraid. They walked the streets, went about their lives. A mother pulled her child along, a vendor sold food on the sidewalk, a man laughed into his communicator. They didn't see it. They didn't hear it. Or worse, they didn't care. Zyra felt true fear crawl up her spine. What kind of species lived on a world like this? A world where nightmares hunted in the dark, where entire squads of elite warriors could be erased without a sound, and the locals didn't even blink. What were the humans? Zyra had faced warlords, assassins, and creatures born from the depths of dying stars. But she had never felt this before. The feeling of being completely powerless. She had lost 3 soldiers in minutes. No bodies. No blood. No sounds beyond the whispers in the dark. Her visor was useless. Her sensors were blind. And Earth, the cursed planet, the unconquerable world, kept moving like nothing was happening. The humans walked freely. How? Zyra's claws flexed against her rifle as she forced herself to think. Fear would get them killed. There had to be a way out. She scanned her remaining squad. Relka. Vara. 2 others. That was all. They had started with 12. Her voice came out steady. Rendezvous point. Now. Double time it. No one hesitated. They moved, cutting through the maze-like streets, sticking to the shadows. The city seemed to shift around them, the roads stretching longer than they should have, the buildings rearranging like pieces on a board. They were being led somewhere. Zyra knew it. And she had no choice but to follow. The silent chase. Footsteps. Not theirs. Something was moving behind them, too fast to be a human, too silent to be a machine. Zyra's breathing slowed. No one looks back. Keep moving. Relka flinched. Commander, they're right behind us. I know. Her claws tightened on her rifle. If they ran, they would be picked off one by one. If they fought, they would be fighting something they couldn't even see. And then. The noise stopped. A perfect, unnatural silence. Zyra didn't dare move. Then. Laughter. Not alien. Not a monstrous growl or a death rattle. It was human laughter. A group of humans sat at a street cafe, under glowing streetlights. They were talking, drinking, their faces relaxed. Zyra's throat tightened. They were right in the open. If those things in the dark were hunting, why didn't they attack them? Did they not see them? Or did they know something Zyra didn't? She had to know. Taking a breath, she made a split-second decision. She stepped into the light. The moment her foot hit the glow of the street lamp, the air changed. The crushing silence vanished. The whispering stopped. The unnatural feeling of being watched melted away. The monsters in the dark didn't step into the light. Zyra's pulse pounded. That was it. That was the rule. She turned sharply. Into the light. Now. The squad didn't hesitate. They dove into the circle of human civilization. And just like that, the hunt was over. The presence in the dark didn't chase them. The shifting city streets stabilized. The weight on their shoulders lifted. The humans kept walking past them. Normal. Alive. Untouched. Zyra's mind reeled. The humans knew. They had survived here, not by fighting, not with warships or advanced weapons. But by understanding the rules of their own nightmare. Her blood ran cold. They weren't afraid of the dark. The dark was afraid of them. The man who knew too much. A voice broke her thoughts. You don't belong here. Zyra turned sharply. A human stood before her, arms crossed, eyes unreadable. He was older, dressed in a dark coat, a steaming cup in one hand. He looked completely unimpressed by the heavily armed Nithran warrior standing before him. You're not the first to try. He took a sip. You won't be the last. Zyra's claws dug into her palms. You knew we were here. The man raised an eyebrow. Everyone knew. Zyra's mind raced. They knew. And they did nothing. Why? The human sighed. You thought Earth was weak, didn't you? Zyra said nothing. The man's lips curled into a slow, knowing smile. We've seen things you wouldn't believe. We've fought wars that would make your bones shake. We don't conquer, because we don't need to. He leaned closer, voice dropping to a whisper. Do you know what happens to the ones who try? Zyra's stomach twisted. The human smiled wider. They never leave. Zyra had faced death before. She had stared into the eyes of warlords, watched entire planets burn, and stood on battlefields soaked with the blood of the fallen. But never, not once, had she felt like she wasn't real anymore. Not until now. The human man stood before her, sipping his steaming drink as if he wasn't speaking to a squad of heavily armed alien invaders. As if they weren't trespassers on his world. As if he wasn't surrounded by things in the dark. They never leave. His words clung to her thoughts like a parasite. Zyra's throat tightened. Who? What happens to them? The man chuckled, slow and knowing. Exactly what you've seen tonight. Zyra felt a slow, horrible realization sink in. The Nithrans who had vanished. She thought they had been taken, hunted, killed. But what if they hadn't? What if they had been erased? Not dead. Not captured. Just, gone. Like they had never existed at all. Her pulse pounded in her ears. You're lying. The man smiled. Am I? Behind him, the city was alive, bright, untouched by war. A planet that had never been conquered, not because it was the strongest, but because it refused to be taken. Zyra clenched her fists. If Earth is so powerful, why let us land? Why let us walk your streets? The man shrugged. Because you're not a threat. Not really. Zyra's jaw tightened. Not a threat. Her fleet was orbiting this planet with enough firepower to reduce continents to ash. They were an empire. They were conquerors. And yet, she saw the truth in his eyes. Earth wasn't afraid of them. It had never been. The choice. A sharp wind cut through the streets. The laughter of humans echoed around them, normal and unbothered. Zyra looked at her remaining squad, Relka, Vara, the last survivors. Their faces were pale beneath their helmets. They had all come here expecting to fight an inferior species. Now, they just wanted to survive. Zyra's voice was low. How do we leave? The man tilted his head. You don't. Silence. Then, he sighed. Unless, you choose to. Zyra's eyes narrowed. What do you mean? The man took another slow sip of his drink, as if deciding whether to tell her. You came to take Earth. To own it. But that's not how this planet works. He looked up, staring past them toward the endless night sky. You leave when Earth decides you can. The weight of his words hit like a crashing star. Zyra's mind raced. It wasn't about strength. It wasn't about weapons. It was about acceptance. Earth was a living thing, something that watched, something that judged. And if it didn't want you here, you didn't leave. The warning. Zyra stepped forward, lowering her weapon. If we leave now, will my fleet be spared? The man studied her. His gaze drifted upward, toward the stars, toward the ships waiting above. And then, for the first time, his expression changed. He smiled. Not the knowing, amused smile from before. This was something else. Something darker. Something sadder. You think they're still up there? Zyra's stomach dropped. Her hand shot to her communicator. Vindicator, do you read? Static. Fleet command, respond. Silence. Zyra's blood ran cold. No. It wasn't possible. They were just in orbit. They had weapons. They had defenses. She tried again. Any ship, respond. Nothing. No fleet. No command. No signal. No one left to answer. Zyra staggered back, her mind refusing to process the horror sinking into her bones. 50 warships. Thousands of soldiers. Gone. Not destroyed. Not shot down. Just, erased. Like they had never existed. The man took one last sip from his drink, then tossed the empty cup into a nearby trash bin. You should leave now. His voice was calm. Zyra's breathing was ragged. Her empire was gone. Her people were gone. And Earth? Earth never even fought them. She turned toward her remaining squad. We run. Now. They didn't argue. Because they understood what she did. Earth had already won. Zyra ran. Her soldiers ran. Their heavy boots pounded against the pavement, but no one turned back. No one spoke. Because there was nothing left to say. They weren't escaping. They were fleeing. The humans hadn't fired a single shot. Hadn't deployed their armies. Hadn't even acknowledged the invasion. And yet, 50 warships, her entire fleet, had vanished. Not destroyed. Not defeated. Just, gone. The Nithran Empire had waged wars for centuries. They had crushed civilizations, razed planets, rewritten history with fire and blood. But they had never faced anything like this. Zyra's lungs burned as she pushed forward. Her squad was silent, Relka, Vara, and the last 2 soldiers left. Their eyes were wide, their faces pale beneath their helmets. They were trained killers. And for the first time in their lives, they had nowhere to run. The empty sky. They reached a clearing, a large open plaza with a direct view of the sky. Zyra skidded to a stop, gasping for breath. She activated her visor, scanning the stars. The fleet had to be there. It had to be. Her hands flew over her wrist console, inputting emergency distress signals, running system checks, re-establishing communications. Nothing. There were no warships. No orbiting battle stations. No wreckage, no debris, no sign they had ever existed. The stars above Earth twinkled in perfect silence. Like nothing had ever been there at all. Zyra's breathing came faster, shallower. Her people, her crew, her entire command. Erased. The Empire would never even know what happened to them. Relka whispered beside her. This planet isn't just dangerous, Commander. It's cursed. Zyra clenched her fists, forcing herself to think. No. No, there was a way out. There had to be. If the humans knew how this place worked, then, one of them could tell her. She turned sharply. Find me that human. The one who spoke to us. The man without a name. They found him exactly where they had left. Zyra had seen extinction before. She had watched planets crumble under the weight of her empire's warships, had heard the last screams of dying species fade into static. Entire civilizations had been reduced to nothing, their names lost to time. But never, not once, had she witnessed something erased so cleanly. The sky above was empty. No wreckage. No bodies. No debris drifting in orbit. Her fleet had been swallowed whole. Her fingers trembled as she tried to re-establish contact. Emergency distress signals, encrypted frequencies, fleet-wide pings, nothing. There was no one left to answer. Zyra's throat tightened. This isn't war. It was something worse. Relka's voice was barely a whisper. Commander, if the fleet never existed, that means. Zyra turned to him, realization sinking in. The Empire wouldn't come looking for them. Because as far as the galaxy was concerned, they were already gone. The human who knew too much. They found him exactly where they had left him. Sitting at the same cafe, under the same dim streetlight, sipping from a fresh cup of steaming liquid. The human man. The one who had known before they did. Zyra stormed toward him, grabbing the edge of his table. "What have you done?" He didn't flinch. Didn't startle. He just sighed, setting his cup down with an infuriating slowness. "Me?" He raised an eyebrow. "I haven't done anything." Zyra's claws dug into the metal. "My fleet is gone." The man tilted his head. "You keep saying, gone, like you lost them." He leaned in, his eyes steady. "You didn't lose them. They were never here." Zyra's breath hitched. "That's not possible." The human shrugged. "It is here." She couldn't breathe. Couldn't think. A planet that could erase entire fleets. A world where people simply ceased to exist. And the humans? They just lived with it. The question that shouldn't be asked. Zyra forced herself to stay calm. "Tell me how to leave." The man studied her for a long moment. Then, he smirked. "Oh, now you ask the right question." He leaned back in his chair, arms crossed. "All right, Commander. I'll tell you. But first, answer something for me." Zyra gritted her teeth. "What?" His smile faded. "What do you think Earth is?" She froze. Her mind raced through everything she had seen, the laughing humans, the shadows that hunted, the shifting streets, the vanishing fleet. A death trap? A cursed world? A living entity? None of it fit. And yet, she had no answer. The human leaned closer. "I'll give you a hint. It's not a planet." Her pulse quickened. "What do you mean?" He chuckled, shaking his head. "You don't get it, do you? This place. It isn't meant to be understood. The more you try, the less sense it makes." Zyra's stomach twisted. "It isn't a planet." She looked around, the sky, the streets, the people. A civilization that had never been conquered. A world where invaders simply disappeared. A place where the rules of reality weren't just broken. They were rewritten. The human sighed, standing up. "You want to leave? Fine." He met her gaze. "Stop thinking like an invader." And with that, he walked away, vanishing into the crowd. The only way out. Zyra's squad stood frozen. No one spoke. She turned back to the sky, where her fleet should have been. She thought of all the warlords who had tried before her. The armadas. The conquerors. The ones who had sworn Earth would fall. Not one had returned. Because they never existed long enough to fail. Zyra exhaled. The human's words echoed in her mind. "Stop thinking like an invader." Slowly, she holstered her weapon. She turned to her squad. "Drop your arms." Relka hesitated. "Commander." Now. One by one, they let their weapons fall. And then, the world shifted. It was subtle. The weight pressing against them lifted. The air no longer felt thick. The whispers in the dark stopped. And for the first time since landing, Zyra felt like she could breathe. She looked up. And the sky was full of stars again. Her fleet was back. Orbiting, waiting. Zyra swallowed hard. She had the answer now. Earth could not be conquered. Because it didn't allow itself to be. You could land. You could try. But the moment you saw it as something to be owned, it removed you. Not through war. Not through blood. Through forgetting you ever existed. She turned to her squad, voice steady. We're leaving. Now. No one argued. They walked through the streets, past humans who never even acknowledged them. And as they reached the landing zone, stepping onto the transport, Zyra cast one final look at the city. It had never been a battlefield. It had been a warning. Zyra had walked away from battles before. She had ordered retreats, abandoned missions, and even surrendered once when survival was the only option. But this was different. She wasn't retreating. She was being allowed to leave. And that terrified her more than any war she had ever fought. The final departure. The landing pad shimmered under the city's artificial lights. The transport ship loomed before them, its engines humming softly, waiting, as if Earth itself had decided they could have it back. Zyra hesitated at the foot of the ramp, her claws flexing at her sides. It felt wrong. Like she had missed something. Her soldiers boarded first, silent, shaken. No one spoke of the fleet that had vanished and reappeared. No one asked why the city had twisted around them, why the streets had shifted, why the darkness had swallowed them whole. Because the answer was worse than the questions. Earth had never been conquerable. Because it wasn't a place. It was a force. And it had finally decided to let them go. Zyra exhaled, forcing her legs to move up the ramp. The moment her foot crossed into the ship, she felt it. A shift. A final, almost imperceptible change in the air. It was like a door had closed behind her. Not slammed. Not locked. Just, sealed. Like Earth had stopped watching. And for the first time, she realized how heavy that gaze had been. Orbit. The transport docked with the flagship, and Zyra stormed onto the command deck. Every officer, every soldier, stood stiff and uncertain, like ghosts who had escaped death without knowing how. They had all seen the empty void where their fleet had been. They had all felt it. Now, the stars were back. Their fleet was intact. Their weapons, their ships, their empire, everything had been restored. As if nothing had happened at all. As if Earth had simply decided it was done with them. Zyra turned to her comms officer. Prepare a message for High Command. The officer hesitated. Commander, what do we tell them? Zyra's jaw tightened. The truth? No one would believe it. No one could believe it. How could she explain a planet that rewrote reality? A world that didn't fight, didn't defend itself, just erased those who came to take it? She couldn't. And that was the brilliance of it. Earth never needed to defend itself. Because in the end, there was nothing to defend. If you tried to take it, it simply removed you from the equation. Like an immune system expelling a virus. Like a dream waking up and leaving the nightmare behind. She took a slow breath. We tell them Earth is not worth the effort. A long silence. Then, Relka stepped forward, voice low. Commander, what if they don't listen? Zyra met his gaze. And for the first time, she felt pity for her empire. Then they will learn the way we did. She turned to the helmsman. Set course. We're leaving this cursed world behind. Earth, unconquered. Far below, on the surface of the world they had failed to take, the human man stood exactly where they had left him. He looked up, watching the Nithran fleet pull away. They had learned. He smiled. Good. Because Earth wasn't a place. It wasn't a battlefield. It wasn't even a home. It was a choice. A choice that no conqueror had ever passed. And no one ever would. He took a sip of his coffee, turning back toward the city. The streetlights flickered, the night pressing in again. The darkness shifted, waiting. And then, the whispers began searching for the next invader. And they had been lucky enough to listen.